It's Newsmakers on this Sunday with our guest, labor leader and president of the AFL-CIO, Richard Trumka. And we're joined by Victoria McGrain of Dow Jones Newswires, the economics reporter for that organization, and David Catanese, political reporter for Politico. Folks, thanks for joining us on this Sunday. Richard Trumka, on Friday, the unemployment number came out, 9.5%. No real change from June. 71,000 private sector jobs added. And the president last week, meanwhile, was touting a rebound in the auto industry. He was in Chicago and Detroit. But the president has also said that the administration thinks that the real job growth in this country will happen when small business grows again. What's the AFL-CIO's view of where jobs will grow again, when this unemployment number will turn around, and how that will happen?
Well, it's going to have to be at a much larger rate. Right now we have an aggregate demand problem in the country. Businesses are laying back, they're not spending, they're sitting on money, and we're going to need more than a 2.5 or a 3% GDP growth, projected growth in this country, to create the type of job growth that we need to get out of the hole that this recession put us in. We're about in a 10.5 to 11 million job hole that resulted from this depression or this recession, and so it's going to take a lot more. Hopefully we'll see some in green jobs. Manufacturing, there were some good signs last month. We had, for the seventh month in a row, we had growth in manufacturing, which was a good sign. You had 71,000 jobs created in the private sector, which was a good sign. Of course, the bad sign is, from last month, we had over 200,000 jobs on the federal side, the trunk, 150-some thousand from the federal government. Most of those were consensus or census jobs that were starting to wind down. But the bad sign, and the one we're really worried about, is state and local governments shed 48,000 jobs last month, and we think that's just the beginning. That's why we've pushed so hard to get aid to state and local governments so that we didn't see the contraction, because we stand to lose 900,000 teachers, police officers, and firefighters in this country if we don't get something done and get some aid to state and local government. So what the Senate did and what the House is going to do this week was a welcome sign to stop that from happening and having more unemployment.
Republicans in Congress jumped on the latest jobs report as evidence that the Democrats' policies aren't working, and that the Obama administration is spending too much and isn't doing what needs to be done to help the economy. Do you agree with that at all?
Well, it's kind of hard for me to take them seriously because they've only had two proposals so far. One is to cut the age of Social Security and cut benefits, or raise the age of Social Security and cut benefits, and the other one's cut taxes on the rich. They've stood in the way of every single jobs program that was out there. They stood in the way of the original Stimulus Act. They tried to change it so that we couldn't get jobs created. If it hadn't been for that Stimulus Act and what the president has done, we would be in a depression right now. They stood in the way of Wall Street reform, and if we hadn't done that, we'd be right back to our corporations and Wall Street were running wild. That's their policy so far.
Do you think voters get that, though? It seems to be,
some do. I think some do, Victoria, and some don't. I think voters are angry and they're frustrated, and they're frustrated and angry because things aren't getting done. And if you look at who's stopping them right now, the Republicans have really stood in lockstep to stop every single job program, every single thing. They even stood in the way of unemployment insurance extension for people who have been unemployed for long periods of time. So they have no credibility when it comes to what's our policy. Their policy has been to stop everything Obama's doing. Had Obama not stepped in and did what he did with the stimulus package, we would have been in a depression. Had he not done what he did with and pushed so hard to get Wall Street reform, we would have been right back to the policies of George Bush, where corporations and Wall Street ran wild, deregulated, did what they want, and created the mess that we're now in.
Considering the job hole that we're in and the 9.5% unemployment rate, some on both sides have said, one of your priorities, the Employee Free Choice Act, is dead. But, I've also seen recently that Senator Harkin has said, why not bring it back during a lame duck session? I'm just curious to get your thoughts on that. Do you believe the Employee Free Choice Act is dead in this type of economic environment? And would you support bringing it back in a potential lame duck session to try to get that passed?
Well, just for the listeners out there, let me tell you why the Employee Free Choice Act is important. Our economy is 70 to 72% driven by consumer spending. And if people don't have money in their pockets, they can't spend. Over the last 20 years or so, wages in this country have been stagnated, and to compensate for that, workers went through a bunch of strategies. They worked overtime, they sent second people into the workforce, they got a second job. None of those worked, and then they began borrowing. First with high-tech stock borrowing, and then with the housing bubble, and they borrowed. And that all went poop, and it doesn't exist. We know we can't do that anymore. So if you're going to have an economy that really grows, you have to have aggregate consumer demand. The only way to do that is to have people that have money in their pocket. The best way to do that is bring collective bargaining to more people. That's what happened between 1946 and 73 when the middle class was born. 37.5% of the country had collective bargaining. We were able to bargain for a bigger share of the wealth that we produce at those corporations, so that these giant record profits we're seeing corporations have right now aren't being shared with workers. If we have more collective bargaining, they will be shared. That's why the Employee Free Choice Act is so important. It's part of the solution to creating an economy that really does work for everybody.
That's the case for it, though, but is it politically palatable?
To answer your question, I think you'll see the Employee Free Choice Act come up again. I think you'll see it probably before the end of the year.
Really?
Yeah.
In a potential lame duck, or not before the November elections?
Probably. It could be either one.
Do you have any specific guarantees from certain members of Congress that that's
No.
the case? Or
No
okay.
guarantees. None.
So why do you think, I mean, it's such a controversial proposal, as you know, in such a tough economic environment. With the November elections right around the corner, how could you really say that you're confident that it would come back to the floor?
I think it'll be back to the floor because we're working on strategies to get that done. Let me ask you a question. I think this is only for why do you think it's controversial?
Well, I think Republicans that have emailed me knowing that I was going to speak to you, I think they make the case that it would raise costs and burdens on businesses and hurt small business owners. They make the case.
Wouldn't it also do other things? Wouldn't it also create aggregate demand? Wouldn't it do what the rest of the world has done?
If it's
all the countries that have fared well, the best in this recession, have had a higher wage strategy than we have in this country. So you can't say that having collective bargaining would make us less competitive and would hurt us, because it's helped other countries.
But if it's so
That's
popular,
what it would do
why haven't Democrats, who have majorities in both houses, brought it to the floor? Why hasn't it been brought to the floor, and why hasn't it gotten a vote? Why hasn't it passed?
That's a good question. You have the president supports it, the vice president supports it, a vast majority of the House support it, a vast majority of the Senate report it, and like 100 and some other bills in this country, 40 Republicans said we're saying no to everything, and so they've stopped it. It has come to the House and the Senate. Remember, it passed by a large majority in the House. It's been in the Senate where 40 Republicans have said no, just like they've said no to extensions of unemployment benefits, to help for state and local government. They've said no to everything. It doesn't surprise us that they would say no.
Can we look at the something we know is coming up on the House floor this week, and that's the aid to education. That part of that $26 billion package that the House will take up on Tuesday. Coming up, they're coming back in an atmosphere, certainly a political atmosphere, where there's a lot of concerns by voters on how much money is being spent. What's the AFL-CIO's view, number one, of the package that's coming out? And what do you say to members who are concerned about casting another vote for more government spending?
Well, first of all, it's ridiculous. We have a job crisis right now. We don't have a debt crisis right now. The only thing that can possibly make this recession and this recovery from not stalling and going back into recession is if government continues to do some stimulus spending. And unfortunately, the states aren't in a position to do that. So it's going to take aid from the federal government. And that's the choice that's going to be made. Whether you're going to prevent, well, it could be up to 900,000 teachers, firefighters, and police officers from getting laid off. All public servants, all that take care of the public good, if we don't get that aid. We need to have the aid to those schools so that they don't lay those teachers off. Look, there are four things that drive an economy: consumer spending, That's not happening because wages are flat. That's why we need the Employee Free Choice Act, so that more people can get more money in their pocket to grow this economy. The second is business investment. They're sitting on $1.8 trillion in profits, record profits. They're not spending it. The third that drives the economy are net exports, and we don't have net exports in this country. Haven't for 10 years or so. We have net imports. And the fourth is government spending. And right now, the federal stimulus package is being negated because states and local governments are contracting, and so federal spending is almost negated out.
In addition to this education aid Tuesday, do you see the need for more government stimulus spending beyond that?
Absolutely. Because if you want to do away, even the people that you were talking about, that were talking about deficits, the best way to get rid of deficits are to create jobs so that people have a job, can pay taxes, and can be contributing parts of this economy. We need more stimulus in this country, or this recession is going to stall and go back into a severe recession, if not a depression.
To pick up on your point about net exports, the Obama administration is sort of reviving a push for the South Korea Free Trade Agreement and other trade agreements as part of their initiative to expand exports. But labor has traditionally been a big opponent of these, the pending free trade pacts, including the one with South Korea. So how do you square those two? I mean, are you willing to work with the Obama administration? Is there a South Korean free trade agreement that you all could get behind?
Of course there is. Here's what we've said all along. We haven't been against trade agreements because we're against trade agreements. We've been against trade agreements because they've been bad for this country. They haven't given us a fair shake. Take South Korea, for instance. All of the non-tariff barriers that South Korea has that prevents our products from going into South Korea are preserved by the Bush trade agreement with South Korea. What we're saying is make that fair. Eliminate those non-tariff barriers so that our products can go into their country as easy as their products can come into our country, and we'll take a look at it. We'll help you with those negotiations. If they do, we can support it. If they don't, of course, we'll oppose it. We will oppose any bill that is one-sided, unfair, and will outsource more American jobs without us having a fair chance to compete. And that's what that trade bill and the other ones that have been drafted do in their current form.
Has the Obama administration given you any confidence that they're going to come up with a trade agreement that you can deal with? I mean, their goal is November.
Well, they have. They've
okay.
talked about going back and renegotiating it. They've asked various groups what they think the problems are with the bill. We've outlined to them what we think our problems are. We'll work with them to try to see that those problems can be solved, and we'll go from there.
Going back to the Employee Free Choice Act, this is sort of a political question, but obviously you guys got involved in the Arkansas primary earlier this year for the Senate. You said that, Republicans are the reason that this hasn't gotten through. But Senator Blanche Lincoln has been very vocal. She's opposed to that bill. That's the reason you guys got into that race, supported her opponent.
David.
But that's partial the reason that you got into that race and supported Lieutenant Governor Bill Halter. Is that fair?
Well, let me tell you why we got into the race, because I think this is very, very important. You believe that I sat up in an office in Washington, D.C. with a couple of my colleagues and said, Blanche Lincoln is bad, let's go against her. It didn't happen that way. Our members in Arkansas said, she doesn't support us in Arkansas, we want you to go against her. They made the endorsement for Bill Halter, and we got into it. Was part of the reason why? Because she hasn't supported us on the stimulus bill, on the Employee Free Choice Act, on a dozen other issues? Of course it is. She didn't support working people, and the working people of Arkansas, our members that are in Arkansas, said, we won't support her. So we went against her.
But in a tough election year, is there any regrets on how aggressively you went after her, seeing that now she is down 20 points to her Republican opponent? And I'm guessing you probably agree with more on her than her Republican opponent. Do you have any regrets about how much money, time, resources you put into beating up on Blanche Lincoln, and now she's hobbled going into the general election?
None. Our members said that she didn't represent them, that Bill Halter was the best candidate. I think working people are tired of taking the least of two evils. We're going to be playing in primaries, and we're going to try to elect people that actually represent working people, not those that are less against us than another third-party candidate. So we don't have any regrets. We think it was a good thing to do.